Amen. So there I was, down on my knees, looking down through a 10 by who knows how long foot hole I had just finished sawzalling in the floor of a double-wide trailer outside of Budd, West Virginia. I had teenagers on both sides of me and over my shoulder looking down into the same hole. I remember thinking to myself, how did it ever get this bad? We're going to have to rebuild the floor joist before we can even replace the floor. Is that a rat down there in the mud? Of course it's a rat. Look at all the garbage down there. It's like the Four Seasons for rats down there. Oh, and did I tell you, it was about 90-something inside this trailer with enormous humidity, which was steaming up through the hole in the floor we just caught because it had torrentially poured the night before, and all the water had run down the hill and underneath the trailer, and it was now evaporating like a Turkish bath up into the room where we were. Oh, and I forgot to mention, there was also a very strong smell of canine urine permeating not just the inside but the outside of the house, the entire property, because there were a lot of dogs. And there were these looks on the teenagers' faces, all of whom were students at Dover-Sherburne or local prep schools. You know the look. It's a look of, I don't know what face I should make in this situation because I've been taught not to make faces and let my inner feelings out because that will make people feel bad. You all remember that lesson when you were a kid? Your president done took our jobs. Huh? I exclaimed with something of a neck snap. And in my mind, I remember thinking, I drove 16 hours, I'm sleeping on the floor of a gym and eating crummy food, and I have to listen to this? Now, June was her name, Junebug, to many of her family members and neighbors who lived around the holler and stopped by the time. And I have to be honest with you, it was hard to figure out to me who was neighbors and who were family with her, or who was married to whom, or had been married to whom, or was about to get married to whom, and whose kids were which people's kids. But June was a heavy-set woman. She was sitting on a couch in the room on the other side of the hole with one of her many dogs who was responsible for the strong urine smell. Your president done took our jobs, she said again with a look of rebel defiance that I'm sure my ancestors saw on the faces of her ancestors at Bull Run or Gettysburg 150 years ago. And I have to say, I had to bite my tongue from my knee-jerk retort, which was, yeah, he did, and I'm glad he did. Don't you folks know that we've got global warming and that coal dust is killing you people? And that while the mines are putting money in your pockets, they're also putting you all in your graves? You see, June had me pegged. Mr. Obama was my president. And I am a Massachusetts liberal who does think in my very bones that we know better up here than they do down there. That we're right and they're wrong. And that because of my superiority, because of our superiority, we live in a beautiful, safe, and clean town that they can't even begin to imagine. In the same way, the teenagers with me couldn't believe how June lived. That I and all of us are so highly educated, gone to the best schools, and had more years of education than probably everyone in June's family combined. But instead of letting my bigotry spill out into the room, I said what good ministers say, well, let's see what we can do about your floor. Now, throughout the course of the week that we worked in June's home and around June's home, June regularly let drop her dislike, if not deep-seated contempt, tangible, maybe even hatred, for me as an example of the stereotype of which I am. But just to be fair, the truth is I disapproved of her and just about everything about her. I disapproved of her life choices and her work ethic. I disapproved of her opinion about the federal government when she was living on government assistance that was paid for by taxes coming from Massachusetts. I disapproved of her hygiene, her disregard for garbage, how she was raising her kids, the food, the smoking, the lack of physical fitness, the TV was going all day, her sense of economy, her sense of animal husbandry with dogs, and how she thought about guns and gods and gays and women's reproductive rights. You know the list. You name it. I disapproved. Yep, we had each other pegged. June had a leg up on me, though, and that leg was this. She was honest and she was transparent. You see, I'm a waspy Yankee, after all, and I was raised to only express my bigotry in front of people I knew agreed with it. And while June was letting it all hang out there in front of total strangers, I didn't share with her the brokenness of my life, all the pain I felt, the things that had happened to me, all the bad choices I had made in life and the bad consequences that came out of it. I kept it all bottled up while June just let it pour out all day long over the top of Geraldo Rivera and other great commentators on the American social condition. But the thing was, June had a huge hole in her floor, and she could not afford anyone but me and 6 kids from Dover Sherburne to fix it. But there was another side to June. Isn't there always another side? In addition to her comments about life up north in Massachusetts where there aren't any Christians, over the course of the week, June told me a lot about all of her suffering. The way she suffered for all the people who she loved who had died too young. The way she suffered for all the people she loved who were trapped in opioid addiction or alcohol addiction. She suffered for everyone she knew. Everyone in her whole town, including herself, who were trapped in low and no income situations because of economic and political decisions that were made far, far, far away from her little holler. She told me about how she suffered because her body was a prison in some very significant ways. And through it all, she had this, for me, being a Massachusetts liberal, an amazing fatalism about the tsunami of repeated large and low-grade disasters which were the storyline of her life. From way before she was born, and almost certainly were going to be the storyline of her kids and grandkids. And I wasn't born yesterday. Through it all, I could see this woman had a deep and open-handed love for her kids and her grandkids and her neighbors and her filthy dogs. And she loved her town. She just loved that town. She could not go anywhere else. Yes, indeed, June and I were separated figuratively by a great divide and literally by a huge hole in her floor. This is how the story turns. And it always turns the same way everyone has two sides. By the grace of God, she showed me the holes in her heart, and they opened up a hole in my heart for her. And that hole is that hole of compassion. I was telling the kids in Greek, spagnitsomai, to have your bowels yearn, to feel sympathy and pity. Up here, we call it tearing at your heartstrings, making your heart ache. It was what Jesus felt when he saw all those hungry people who ran around the lake to see him. It's what the Samaritan felt when he saw the half-dead man by the side of the road. Compassion. It's where it all begins and it all ends. Christian activism, in one word, is compassion. Com, to mean with, and passio, to suffer with. It's why God came among us as Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, to suffer the human experience. To have friends who ran away, people who didn't understand. His parents were probably disappointed in him. And then he went and died on a cross, which is just about as bad as it gets. So that God would be with us where we really are and come near to us as crippled and blind and deaf and diseased and socially outcast and hungry people. And then all the people who were like me in the world, who were able to hide it all inside, put the best face forward so that only God sees. But we know that God feels that compassion, that God's bowels yearn for more. So I'm going to end this sermon by telling you a secret. You probably know it already, but I'm going to tell it to you anyways. No two people are ever going to completely agree about anything. We're not going to agree on what's good, and we're not going to agree on what's bad. Unless you've browbeaten your spouse into agreeing with you, they probably don't agree with you about everything. Ask your parents, ask your kids, ask your neighbors what they really think. They don't. But if you take that degree of disagreement and you multiply it out by all the other factors of social distance, to include people all around the world, even Bud, West Virginia, but then go to Vietnam. You know, we're not going to agree about things. But, just like where the Samaritan sentence begins, but the pain. When life hurts, you have a hole in your life and you turn to someone and you share how it feels to suffer. And they reach out and are with you in that place. Then you know we're all in the same boat. And God's in the boat with us, calming the storm. Now, I don't know what you think of me after I said what I said. I don't know if you think I tried to come off as spiritually superior in my little story, but I need to tell you that old Junebug, she felt sorry for me. When I left, the last thing she said when she hugged me was, "I'm going to pray for you up north." With all those wrong-thinking people and crazy lifestyles you people lead, working all the time, wearing ties, without your kin living next door and up and down the street where you can see them all day long. And if you ever get tired, come on back. God bless her.